Hey guys, Peter here to tell you about the latest from the Amity Affliction, Now Without My Ghosts, out May 12 on Pure Noise Records. The album has 10 tracks, 38 minutes in length, and this is the band's 8th full-length studio album. They are an Australian metalcore band. One of the weakest spots of this record, in my humble opinion, is the design. When I look at an album, I look at an experience. A sense of growth has to be there, a sense of trajectory, start, middle, and end. This album doesn't have any of those three. You almost feel like you're starting in the middle, and then the middle becomes the end, and then the end becomes the beginning. It's a very jolting record from that point of view. It doesn't have a path, a clear path, or at least somewhat of a visible path that allows fluidity between tracks, that allows a sense of connection and connectivity and growth between tracks. You almost have to reset with every single song. Now, this takes nothing away from the quality of the individual tracks, and if you listen to this album on Spotify and you cherry picking a song here and there, you're going to get the most out of them because the songs have quality within their own individuality. It's just the way they were put together on this track listing, it doesn't give strength to the collective. It kills the fluidity of the collective. It kills the playability of the collective. So it's an album that took me a few times to go through it until I could forget about what I wanted out of it and just concentrated on what each and every single song gave me. It's almost like watching a TV series and forgetting about the overall plot, the overall arching plot of the series, and just enjoying the quality of the individual episodes. Now, as far as the sound is concerned, I honestly felt like this album had great sound texture, great sound experience. It's a very layered, very textured album with great production behind it. And it's not easy to put a record like this together because you could definitely see all the different elements and the attributes, the different attributes that they have that they add to the individual songs. It's also an album that, while not sounding dark, this is not a dark sounding album by no means. It's actually having a lot of brightness. It's a very melodic, a very light-hearted at times sounding experience. But underneath that, and even within that melody, you're gonna find a little bit of a somber, introspective, dark record. You just gotta peel the layers. You just gotta dive deeper into these songs in order to find that experience, but it's not necessarily there at the surface, and it's not always that you hear an album that feels very bright, that has a lot of energy, that has a lot of intensity, and at the same time it leaves you wonder why are you so down? Why do you feel so depressed after the listening experience? And that is because of what's underneath it, what's hiding in between the lines. And this album does that, gives you that duality of emotions extremely well. It's also an album that feels very emotionally unbalanced. And that's not a bad thing. When you look at the lyrical content, when you look at the energy, having an unbalanced emotional record works. But this album allowed that to be translated also to the sound experience. And you see that specifically when it comes to the heavier side of the album and the more melancholic side of the album. Some songs manage that coexistence extremely well. The fluidity between one and the other felt organic, it felt natural. But most of the songs on this album suffer from the same issue that the record as a whole has, which is that jolting aspect between elements. Moving from the more melancholic, methodic soundscape, even brighter at times, to the heavier soundscape just didn't feel natural. It just didn't have an organic movement. It just didn't have an organic connection. And those songs become a little bit more difficult to process. Those songs require a lot more out of the listener. And when you infuse songs like that in an overall design, and you don't do a good way in terms of matching the ones that are more direct with the ones that require more of the listener, the overall album feels very sparse, it feels very broken, and then those individual songs really stick out, making it for a much harder experience all around. And that is what this album is all about sound-wise. And that takes nothing away from the quality of the execution, from the quality of the recording, from the mixing, from the mastering, from the production, because this album still has great guitar sound. I really enjoy the overall guitar sound of this record, on the more melodic side, on the heavier side. I really enjoyed the synths, what they add, the melody that they add, but not just the melody that they add, that underlining darkness that this album has. It's really well defined by how they create a much better synchronized wall of sound between all the other elements, almost like the glue that brings in the drums, bass, and guitars together as one so that the puzzle is slightly clear. And then the drum sound, when it's heavy, it's brutally heavy. When it's not heavy, it creates a distance. It creates a sense of a bigger footprint for the soundscape, for the record itself, but always having a positive impact from start to finish. So it's a record that offers a lot of dualities. And when you have a lot of dualities, you normally tend to focus as a listener on those dualities and not necessarily on what brings it together. This album needed to be a little bit better brought together as one. I think with the songs that they have, they could have done that. I think perhaps the track listing could have been changed a little bit. I honestly don't feel like they picked the right opening track for this album, because it's a song that jolts you from the beginning, and I think you want a smoother transition into the record and then have more of those jolts when you're already connected with the experience. And because of that, it was always an album that took me a little bit longer to get into. Once again, it comes down to the quality of the songs versus the quality of the collective. I honestly feel like this is an album that has great singles, it just doesn't feel like a great album. As far as favorite songs are concerned, I want to start off with Death and The Setting Sun. Heavy melodic experience is pretty much the common denominator of this track. Being more melodic and warm musically and then heavy vocally works really well in the verses, because the song itself, the sound brings you down, and then the vocals are on top of it, infusing heaviness at the same time as you have a more of a melodic approach, creating that duality, but a duality that works really well as one. Once you move into the chorus is brighter musically and vocally, but because you have that underlying brightness, that underlying melody in the verses, transferring all of that energy into the chorus on both ends of the spectrum doesn't feel that far apart. It feels almost like a continuation, just changing the knob from 8 all the way to 11 as far as the overall brightness and as far as the overall melody. I like this approach. It feels more continuous, it feels more connected, and even though the chorus and verses offer two very different experiences, the two of them really feel like one is the continuation of the other. The heavy breakdown towards the end adds to that sense of heaviness that the vocals have been there and giving you almost consistently in the verses. It infuses some chaos in the track, and it's never a problem when you infuse chaos in a track that's very predetermined, specifically if that chaos comes towards the end of the song and not necessarily in the middle or beginning. So great track all around in terms of how all the different elements of this album come together as one. Next you have When It Rains, It Pours. The keyboards, every song has the synthesizer sound that works as a very nice layer, very nice texture to the overall experience. In this track, perhaps you feel it a little bit more than others. It creates a little bit more of an atmosphere, and it creates a little bit more of a roadmap for where this song is and where this song is taking you. The drums have a lot of heaviness, and when the harsh vocals add even more heaviness to it, it's easy to see where the track is trying to push you towards. Now the chorus drops down as far as heaviness, it drops down as far as intensity, and infuses a lot of melody with the clean vocals coming in order to emphasize that complete break and that complete change from where you were to where you are. The verses heavier musically, vocally, the chorus more melodic, more brighter, more stripped down. Definitely a pattern that emerges from beginning and end, and a pattern that stays consistent from beginning to end. Last but not least, God Voice, big wall of sound. One of those tracks that it's not about having one element moving one way and the other one moving the other, or moving two elements in parallel with one another. This is really about everything coming together as one in order to create more of a thick experience all around. And the chorus is outstanding. One of the most memorable choruses on the entire record. It infuses a great experience because you have the clean vocals, you have this backing vocals behind it, but they're not really behind it because they're kind of bleeding through the actual vocals of the chorus. So it just becomes this really interesting atmosphere and experience that makes you feel like you're floating. The vocals in the chorus are floating. They're not up front, they're not behind the sound, they're just floating around the sound. And the backing vocals is definitely what helps with that experience. So it's memorable, it's catchy, it's atmospheric, it's easy to remember, and when you move into the verses of this track, you're always thinking of that chorus and you're just counting the seconds to get back into it, because it has a sense of despair, it has a sense of of emptiness, but at the same time it's super welcoming in how it feels and how it embraces you as a listener. This is it. The Amity Affliction, Not Without My Ghosts, out May 12 on Pure Noise Records. Let me know your thoughts on the band, on the singles. Use the comment section below. I'll be reading those, getting back to you. Take care, guys.